These have to be the best looking Ping G irons to date, but will they perform just as good as they look? So I've got 4 irons here from the G425 range. I've got a U-wedge, an I-iron, a 7 and a 5 iron. Now these have been custom fit, so they're set up perfectly for me. I've got an Elevate 95-gram shaft and it's a regular flex, and these are also in the orange dot from Ping because they're set up slightly flatter than standard. Now first up we've got the U-wedge. This is a little bit different for me because typically I carry separate wedges to my iron set, but obviously with this G425 range you've got options all the way through the back. So the U-wedge here is kind of equivalent to a 52-degree offering, and obviously visually it looks a bit different to people who would typically carry a gap wedge. I'd say here when you're looking at the sole, it looks quite chunky, and personally I was a bit worried how that was going to look over the ball, but then when you put it down behind the ball, you can't really see any of that at all, and it is pretty clean looking. So from this point of view, I'm not actually that worried about the visuals at all. Okay, so the next question is going to be actually how it interacts with the ground and how that thicker sole feels. Although I have to say there is quite a lot of camber on the back, which is helping out with that. It does feel really solid, which is one thing I definitely like. Sometimes I feel when you're using gap wedges, because they're a lot smaller and more compact, you don't really get that nice strike feeling in the same way that you would get with a longer iron. And also sometimes they can get up in the wind a lot more, whereas this felt a lot more controlled, a lot more solid with a bit more ball speed. It definitely feels very easy to hit, and I could see how for higher handicappers this would really help dial in that wedge play, as it's more consistent, especially in terms of off strikes and keeping up that ball speed. All pretty consistent so far. So I felt like I struck that really matte, but it was quite interesting looking at the data because it still got up there at the distance with all the other shots, which is obviously really good to see in terms of that forgiveness. So as you would probably expect, those were flying pretty high and also coming down with a pretty steep descent angle, which is definitely what you want when you're trying to fire in at those pins with your wedges. In terms of distance, this averaged out at 103 yards, and to be honest, I'd be pretty happy with this. Typically for me, with my 50 degree, that would be the distance I'm looking to carry it, and obviously this is a bit weaker, about 52 degrees. In terms of front to back distance, my shortest shot was at 97 and my longest shot was up at 109. So 12 yards difference is not that bad, but I have to say my shortest shot, the 97 yards one, was my first shot, and I swung it like 2 miles an hour slower than any of the other ones. So in terms of out on the course, I think if you were in the flow of a match and used to using this, you wouldn't necessarily see that drop off in distance that I saw there. In terms of spin, this averaged out at just over 8,000 RPM. Now I was pretty happy with this and also with the consistency level of it. I had one shot that was down in the 5,000s, which I struck a bit weird, but all the rest were very consistent. Again, in terms of dispersion, I was really happy. Most of my shots finished within 8 yards of the pin, which is 24 feet, which is pretty good and very consistent. Right, let's work our way through the rest of the set now and see how each club performs. Okay, I've got the 9-iron now. Again, I'm pretty happy with the shape in here. It's noticeable we've gone up a bit in size here from the U-wedge, definitely in terms of length as well, so it's not quite as round or pear-shaped. Those two shots literally pitched right next to each other. What I love about these irons is they just feel so easy to hit, and I also have to say I'm surprised how much I like the feel of the face as well. That felt like it went a long way. The dispersion on this so far is ridiculous. Oh my god, have you seen my front to back dispersion? 3 yards. Okay, that was ridiculously consistent. My average yardage came out at 132 there, which one is pretty long for me with a 9-iron, but the most impressive thing is my front to back dispersion was 3 yards. Literally, my shortest shot was at 130 and my longest was at 133. That's ridiculous. I think this type of iron typically gets that misconception that it's going to be jumpy just because it's a bit bigger, but that level of dispersion from front to back is seriously impressive. Then if we look at the dispersion from left to right, I was really happy with this as well. Typically I like to hit a little draw, and Ping know this, so I've had this custom fit and set up for that. Across those 10 shots I hit there, my worst shot finished 7 yards left of the pin, which is 21 feet. So I'd be really happy with that overall, and to be honest, most of them were a lot closer than that as well. In terms of things that could be a little bit better, my spin was down in the 6,000s. Typically with a 9 iron I would want that to be a bit higher, but I think with this type of club you are going to get to this end of the bag. Having said that, I had a really good height on all my shots and also a really steep descent angle, so that's going to help with that stopping power even if your spin is a little bit lower. Right, 7 iron time. I would say this is probably part of the bag where you start to see the offset in these clubs. That is one thing I don't really like about game improvement irons, because my miss is left, I already hit a draw, so sometimes for me seeing too much offset can be off-putting, but I have to say at this point I'm pretty fine with how much there is here. It is noticeable, but it's not over the top. That's just rolled onto the green at 180 with a 7 iron. Really lovely trajectory and shot shape there. Again, it seems pretty consistent so far. Still got that little draw going, which I do like. I have to say, I'm super surprised just how much I like the way these feel off the face. That definitely probably wasn't what I was expecting, but so far throughout the set it's felt really nice. I think the distance has been really consistent with this as well. I kind of expected it to get worse as I went up the bag. So my average distance there came out at 159. That's pretty long for me with a 7 iron. I would typically be really happy to get up to the 150 mark, never mind nearly the 160. And in terms of front to back dispersion, it was still pretty good. My front to back was 7 yards, with my best shot coming out at 163. This is definitely like 10 yards longer than I would expect with my iron setup. I think what's most impressive is just how consistent the other variables have stayed, even though we've gone up in distance. So obviously that front to back dispersion is still really good ball flight, great descent angle. In fact, to be honest, the ball flight across all three we've tested so far has been really consistent. Again, the spin was a bit low here, averaging at just over 4,700 RPM. With a 7 iron, I probably would want that nearer 7,000, but having said that, it was really consistent across the shots, so you're not going to get kind of a really big high spike or low spike in spin, which is definitely going to help you with that consistency. Generally, my dispersion was fairly good with this. Most of my shots I did have that small little draw that I like to hit. There was a couple where I left the face open and blocked them out to the right, but to be honest, I think you're going to expect some of them out on the course, and the misses really weren't that bad. I think my worst shot was out at like 8 or 9 yards. Right, let's go hit the 5 iron. I think this one's going to be the most interesting in terms of the visual over the ball and how far it goes. Okay, for me, this is where the visual starts to be a little bit off-putting. This has a very long blade length, and it also has quite a bit of extra offset. So I think visually for me I'm going to struggle a little bit with the strikes here, but let's hit it and see. Already I can feel that thicker sole and how it's interacting with the mat. I think it's going to be interesting to see what the strikes are like here, because for me I just feel like I'm going to hit them a bit matty. Pretty strong ball flight to start there. Definitely notice they're flying a bit lower than the other ones were. Personally, I don't feel like this one feels as easy to hit as the others. That was a really strong ball flight. Okay, they were pretty long. The average distance there came out at 177, with my longest shot being up at 182, which is a very big 5-iron for me. To be honest, that's typically where I'd expect my 4 hybrid to sit in terms of distance. In terms of consistency, it's still pretty good from front to back, which I'm pretty impressed with for the fact it's a 5-iron, we've got more ball speed. My shortest shot was at 173 and my longest was at 182, so under 10-yard difference there. Now my flight was a little bit lower with this, and I have to say probably not quite as consistent as we've seen in the other offerings. I did have some really nice high ball flights, but then I also had a few that I didn't quite strike as well, which definitely were a lot lower. But across the lot, I still had a pretty good descent angle, averaging in the 40 degrees, so I'm still going to get a decent soft landing onto a green. I think that's important because the spin was again a little bit low here. It was in the 3,900, so not too far off what I'd expect. I mean, really you'd want about 5,000 with a 5-iron, so it's not too far off, but it is slightly lower. My left to right dispersion wasn't bad at all, but I definitely saw more shots thrown into the right here, and I think that's just a visual thing for me because I was a bit worried about hitting the left, so I just left the face open a little bit. But really in terms of misses, they weren't that massive at all. Overall, I have to say I've been super impressed testing these out, especially with the short irons, which was kind of surprising because I suspected if anything, the long irons might suit me more. We saw that the dispersion was ridiculously consistent across the board, especially in terms of ball speed and that front to back dispersion. And I have to say, it's got me thinking about if I should be carrying a gap wedge or a wedge that matches my set. The 9-iron dispersion was probably the most impressive I've seen in any of my tests so far, and to be honest, that carried pretty much through the bag. I think the only reason it got a little bit worse in some of the longer clubs was because a visual for me of that offset, which I don't necessarily like, and also the fact that I already hit it right to left, that offset's going to exaggerate that a little bit more. But for the majority of people who would be using these clubs, they tend to struggle with a left to right shot, so I think that offset is actually going to really help you out. These are designed to be game improvement irons, so forgiveness is the key story, and I have to say from that point of view, these are super impressive. From a wide variety of strikes, you're getting really good ball speed and really consistent distance and excellent dispersion too. I think people are going to be thoroughly impressed when they get these in their hands this year. Right, that's all for today. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below or drop me a line on Twitter or Instagram. If you're after more reviews from the Ping G425 range, head to our Ping playlist where you can find them all. And if you're after more golf content, head to the National Club Golfer social media channels for more.